Hi, Theran. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you doing today, Alan?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you so much for helping me out with this Values Jam challenge this month. And I've got the Values Jam card deck that we'll choose a card from shortly. But before we do that, do you mind just giving us a short intro to you and the great work that you do?
Yeah, so my name is Theran. I was joking with you just before the call about how to pronounce it. I often say to people, if when you see me, you think either you need therapy or I need therapy, that's the way to remember. You pronounce it Theran. So you take the P away, you put an N there instead. So yeah, that's me. That's my name, Theran. Theran Knighton Fitt. I work at a company called Mygrow, and we develop people's emotional intelligence by doing helping them do the hard long-term neurological re-architecturing that is needed inside their brains at a physiological level to change the hardware that they have in their brain so that the software of their experience of the world can have a different perspective, both in how they see themselves, and how they see their context, and therefore how they navigate the world that they're in, managing themselves and their relationships with others. So that's what emotional intelligence is. And what we do at Mygrow is to walk with people through technology, through a technological solution platform, to be able to practice the techniques that come from the field of positive psychology and EQ, to practice the techniques that are needed, a lot like normal like exercise is required for your muscles. The same kind of principle applies to your emotional muscles. You actually have to do things on a regular basis to build the neurology you need to actually engage with the world in a healthy way. So that's what we do. My role here in the company, I'm one of the co-founders with Mark, and my personal vision, I guess, is to realize humanity. So the role that I have here at Mygrow, we call the Chief Humanizing Officer. And it takes many different forms. I'm very involved in the creative side and in the content side of what we do, but it's always through that lens, that value of valuing the human person, valuing the human collective, and doing what we can to make sure that our product and our engagement with the world is as humanizing as it can be. So yeah, as an entrepreneur, I do everything. I'm involved in
Fantastic.
nearly every aspect of the business.
Do you know, I used Mygrow, and what I really like about it, or the two things that I like about it most, I guess, one is the focus on practice,
Yeah.
because it's kind of there's so much content and knowledge out there, but you can't, like I was saying to somebody yesterday, if you read a book about how to play tennis by Venus Williams, it doesn't mean to say that you can play
Yeah.
tennis the next day, right?
Yeah.
And so that
Even if she's giving you tips and tricks and not just telling you about her own experience, even if she's actually trying to help you in the words, it's not going to cut it.
Exactly right. And then the other bit that I like is the droplet, the daily
Yeah.
small thing each day, and then it builds over time. Because again, people kind of, I don't know what it is. It's this thing about people seem to, oh, yeah, well, I've got this book, How to Play Tennis by Venus Williams, so I'm going to read it this weekend. And that means I can play tennis now. And it's not
Yeah,
like
yeah,
so.
yeah.
All best wishes and all power to you for the work that you do. And today, what we're going to do is choose a Values Jam card. So these are already shuffled. That's a bit of a personal story because for quite some time since last October, when we launched these, I religiously put these back in alphabetical order because I like things to be orderly. And then one day I kind of forced myself to leave it, and now they're all shuffled, and I'm feeling pretty comfortable with it actually. So, what I'd like you to do is tell me how many times shall I cut the deck?
Let's go with three.
Three. Okay, so you've got a middle, a left, and a right pile. So, which would you like?
Middle pile.
Middle. And in here we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. So 1 to 14. What's your number?
Let's go with one.
Wow. Okay. So this is the card that you've chosen.
Commitment. Okay.
So, any initial reaction to what you've chosen?
Well, We're committed now. We've got it.
We're done.
We're done. I don't know what kind of reaction, like in terms of the value of commitment.
No, not necessarily. No, it's more of an emotional reaction because I guess like so yesterday I played this and the card that we drew was recognition, and the person that I was playing with looked a bit shocked, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "That's one of my core values. That is just too weird." I remember what's the opposite of end of that? I remember a values jam with the value of justice.
Yeah.
And this lady at the beginning, it was a small group call, and she said, "I'm feeling really angry at the moment. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm not feeling good at all." And that's because when I think about justice, the only need for it is when there is injustice. And she was really in not such a good place. So it's not important. I was just
while you're chatting, while you're chatting, I'm verbally processing I'm vicariously using your words to verbally process. Commitment it's sort of it's intrinsically baked into all values, isn't it? Unless we are committed to our values, what power do they have? What value do they actually have? So yeah, I often talk about development as an intrinsic value that needs to be rooted in all other values, because if you have a vision for where you want to get to, it's always going to be a journey from where you are to there, and the only way you're going to get there is to fill in the gap through growth and development. But I guess the same thing applies here with commitment. It's intrinsically baked in, I would say. Unless there is commitment, you've just got these espoused values that, so what? They're just words.
Yeah, and I think that's that practical, pragmatic approach coming through again there. So the way we play Values Jam is that on the back of the cards, there's a series of questions, and it doesn't matter that you can't see what the questions say, but you can see that the first one and the last one are in bold. And that's because the card deck was inspired by the concept of a music jam, right? So when a music jam happens, you don't pre-qualify the musicians. They just turn up with whatever instrument they've got. There's very little in the way of guidance. They just start something. If during the session somebody stumbles, nobody kind of calls the proceedings to a halt. It's kind of built in. That's right. So and that's what we do. So the only guidance really is that we'll start with the first question. We'll end with the final question. We might or might not refer to the 4 questions in between. It depends how the conversation goes. But the first question is this. So what does commitment mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like? So would you like to have a go at that?
What does commitment mean? I think commitment means integrity, that there is a congruence between who you say you are or what you say you will do and what that actually looks like in practice. We often talk about the difference between espoused values and enacted values. And if there is a difference, then there is a lack of congruence between them. And that's because there's no commitment to what's been espoused. My mother, I remember, it's just popped into my head right now, many years ago, 20 years ago, probably, my mother said to me, and it's going to take a little bit of a tangent and then I'll hopefully land it. I'll hopefully bring it back. She said to me when I was young, when all my siblings were young, there are 4 of us in the family, 4 kids. She said, I had to honestly come to the decision of whether I was going to raise you to be responsible or not, because it's a burden to be responsible. It's a burden to have responsibility as a value. And the world is not responsible. So am I just making life hard for you if I raise you to be responsible? And luckily, I think she erred on the side of no, it's better to be responsible. So I'm going to raise my children to be responsible, even though it's going to give them frustration when they encounter a world that is not responsible. And irresponsible is a different word. Responsibility is a different word, but it's a cousin or a half brother at least to the idea of commitment. and it speaks to, am I what I say I am? Am I going to follow through on what I follow through on? You must interrupt me at any point if you'd like to say anything, because I've got one more thing to say as an initial reaction.
Go ahead.
One of my life mottos for the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 years since I came across it is this Latin phrase, esse quam videri, which is it's like a motto and a slogan on I don't know how many businesses and sports clubs and public sector NGOs or NPOs or non-governmental organizations, whatever. I remember doing some research on it, and there was a list of over 100 Wikipedia different organizations that have this motto, and I'm holding you in suspense because I'm assuming you don't speak Latin. But what it means is to be rather than to appear.
Wow. Okay.
So in other words, to not just present yourself as if you are something, but to actually be that thing. And yeah, I came across it through the biography about Gerard Manley Hopkins. I think he was Irish, Northern Irish.
I think so, yeah.
He was English, and he just was a monk in Northern Ireland or something. I'm not sure, but he's had a huge influence on my life, and this was his motto: to be rather than to appear to be. And it's something I've tried to bring into the business we have, and how we engage with clients in the world. But I have a very deep sense that I do not want to pretend to be something. I'm actually committed to being what I say I am. And sure, sometimes that means you got to be vulnerable and you got to be honest and you got to say, I'm falling short of my sermons. I actually posted on a friend's LinkedIn page today. He was being vulnerable about being hypocritical, and my comment to him there, that phrase that popped out was, "We all fall short of our sermons." So at least if we can be authentic in that, then we're still committed to trying to be what we preach.
What a brilliant start. You've just touched on so many things. First, I'm a parent of 4, so I can relate to your mum.
Okay.
Then the fact that you recalled that memory from quite some time ago is significant, because this has been a real surprise for us with Values Jam. It happens repeatedly that people have the experience that you did, where something just pops into their mind from decades ago,
from our formative years.
Yeah, and a psychologist in New Zealand didn't confirm, but said that what might be happening here is that because values are such a deep topic, it might be that lapsed neural pathways are being sparked to either bring that memory back that was either hidden or perhaps in extreme cases lost. And so as a result of what's been happening, and you've just experienced it personally, and as a result of the feedback from the psychologists, we're now speaking to people that work in the areas of Alzheimer's and dementia, because imagine a senior living setting where instead of the residents playing stupid games like bingo to keep them occupied, they can have a conversation with dignity by playing Values Jam with either a fellow resident or a caregiver or a visitor. So imagine, I don't know how old or what your situation is with parents, but imagine you had elderly parents and you went to see them and you had this conversation about commitment with your mum or your dad or your grandparents even, and to find out stuff from them that you previously just wouldn't have known.
Yes.
So, sorry, I digressed a bit there. Then,
no, but that's fascinating. I don't know a lot about Alzheimer's and dementia. I don't have any in my immediate relationships any experience of that. But so I don't speak as an authority. But I do remember reading around how the memories that last the longest are the oldest memories. Which speaks to a concept that we talk about a lot at Mygrow, that the subconscious mind remembers, and it remembers what has, those formative things. So if you're in a season of intense formation, that those things become deeply embedded. You know, when you're in an education space where you are learning something you're passionate about, it's easier to learn and it's easier to remember those things because it's forming you, because you're actually taking that on board in your identity. And something we deal with a lot in terms of I hesitate to say it, but because I don't want to mislead on what it is, the work we do, but the rehabilitative process of reworking old existing neural pathways from formative seasons in our lives. They are so deeply ingrained psychologically at a subconscious level that they come out, even if they're not coming out consciously. Yeah. They're coming out throughout our entire lives, which I would assume is why in Alzheimer's, the oldest memories are the ones that we lose last. It's that classic dynamic of the elderly person misperceiving the wife as the daughter, or the daughter as the wife, because that's what's older. Anyway, so I guess just to continue your riff into a new key, that's what I was thinking.
There was something else that I wanted to ask you about as well, because when you were talking about commitment, you were talking about how it's really being as you say you are, and there not being a gap and all of that sort of stuff. And in theory and in principle, I agree with you 100%. What I'm curious about, though, is when external factors get in the way of a personal commitment. So, and it's just happened to me now. I've remembered my first day at work it must have been the early 1990s. So it was my first day at work at a 5-star hotel in London. I was the food and beverage director, and I lived in the home counties, so about a 1-hour train ride away from the hotel. So I set off in order to arrive an hour before I needed to. First day at work, the tube stopped in a tunnel.
Yeah.
End result was I was late on my first day. And I can feel how I felt then. It was horrible.
And there were no cell phones to.
That's right.
Phone and say.
So I remember sweating, feeling just dreadful, because my commitment was I'm gonna, that's normal. You're gonna be on time at work, right? So what I'm interested to understand from you is your perspective around those external influences and what happens when they might get in the way of a commitment, and the extent to which people either rationalize that or sometimes use it as an excuse, because there's kind of a fine line there between external influences, either what could have been done differently, basically, or do you just give up and say, oh well, I couldn't because. So do you want to share a bit about your thoughts there?
I mean, that the first thing that I'm thinking about is trustworthiness. It's a bit difficult if it's your first day. They don't know yet if you're trustworthy, but the penalty for being a liar is that in time people don't believe what you're saying is true. So what I have noticed as to jump off your example into the digital space, what I've noticed is when people don't show up for meetings, like Zoom meetings, and then they tell me, oh, something urgent came up, which would be the equivalent of the tube stopped. I must be honest, I'm skeptical, because I see people blaming external factors that got in the way of their commitment, and I don't know if that's legit or not. What does urgent actually mean? So if the stakes are high, like I'm sure your old bosses could realize, this guy seems to be an intelligent guy. He's not gonna not try to be on time. So maybe we can trust that and believe that. But in time, when trust has been built up, when I know that Alan is someone who is a committed person, well, then there is something else in the mix. There is a grace in the mix that can undermine the derailing of the commitment. Not that your tube was derailed, but
I see what you did there.
yeah, see, I'm a dad. Yeah, and without that information, I don't know what to say other than in time, relationship covers a multitude of sins, or not even your own sins, maybe the sins of the tube controller or whatever the reason was on the day. Relationship covers those things. Another thought I would have is that that interaction doesn't all lie on you. When you arrive there and you are now sweating from running from the train station because you're already 40 minutes late or whatever the story is, now you don't want to be 48 minutes late, so you're going to gun it to make sure you get there. And now you're sweating, now you're breathing heavily. You're not the only person in that interaction. The person on the other side, the person receiving the communication from you, they have their own set of values. They have what are they committed to seeing you as a human? Are they committed to seeing you as someone who's going to, at least try their best or give their best? Yeah, and when you add in the other variable of the other person, that adds in even more complexity into the dynamic. But also, as I say, to go back to the grace idea, it can add in quite a bit of grace into that interaction. For you to say, I want to be someone who's committed, and an external factor has made me look like I'm uncommitted. Well, there's another person in the mix, and they can choose based on their values how they're going to engage as well.
Mm. There's another interesting dynamic here is about how open you feel you want to be about even mentioning anything that has happened, right? Because and here I'm thinking about my first career in commercial hospitality management, and I remember a story about Ritz-Carlton hotels where a lady, I think it was a lady, came to the front desk of a hotel with a bouquet of flowers and complained that the flowers, some of the flowers weren't, that were dead, basically. The quality wasn't as good as it should have been.
Yeah.
And the receptionist immediately gave the lady a refund. And then the story goes on to tell how the florist was an independent business. It was nothing to do with the hotel. But for Ritz-Carlton, their reputation was so important to them, and their commitment to service quality was so great that they chose to spend the $25 or whatever it was, so that person would feel, oh yeah, Ritz-Carlton are what they say they are.
Yeah.
And similarly, that in that example of the train, I think it's still a bit my perspective, actually, that I shouldn't trouble the other person with the external factors that got in the way of me. It's not their bag, right? It's like, I was due to be there on time. That's what their expectation was. So do they really want to hear a load of, I had something more important than be on a Zoom call with you stories? And I'm like you, I tend to be a bit skeptical. I remember, again, in the hotel industry, we had this massive storm one day, and I had employees walking for 2 hours to get to work. Whereas, you could say there was no transport, and so I couldn't get to work.
Yes.
Where is that line? What's the realistic expectation on both sides, actually? I find it fascinating because you've touched on relationships, and I guess that's part of this, actually. Your commitment becomes stronger the deeper the relationship is.
Yeah. And well, definitely, but also the taking for granted of each other becomes the thing. Told my wife I'd be home, but now this meeting's running on. I'll prioritize this meeting over the person I'm supposed to love more than anyone else. So there's that part of the dynamic. But another relationship that we have to factor in, and this is obviously the world we come from, the world of emotional intelligence, which is first and foremost the relationship with yourself. You know, self-perception is the beginning of the whole process for you. How you see yourself does determine how you engage, how you express yourself. So self-perception comes before self-expression. And commitment to you being on time at that job, or commitment to those other employees walking 2 hours in the rain, first and foremost, that is actually a commitment to themselves. It's not a commitment to the job. That's secondary. I am committed to being someone who's reliable. Yeah. I am committed to being someone, to go back to my mother's quandary, someone who's committed to being responsible. I am committed to being rather than just appearing to be. So I think, you know, maybe it doesn't apply. I haven't fleshed out all the use cases of commitment, but it strikes me that your commitment to someone else is first of all a commitment to who you are going to be in the dynamic, in the relationship.
This is interesting because I'm thinking particularly with you being in South Africa, and I'm thinking of the concept of Ubuntu here, because you know what that kind of stresses, and I love a lot of what is covered in that concept, because it seems to me that there is an over exaggeration in terms of our individuality in the world. Whereas
in the rest of the world, you mean like in the Western world or Western culture?
Yes, particularly. And
would your listeners be familiar with Ubuntu? Do you need to give an explanation?
Well, I'd be grateful if you could, because you're probably going to do it a bit better than me.
I'll try. Ubuntu as an idea is the idea that I am through you, but not just you, singular, you, plural. That actually it's the community that forms the individual, that my identity lives outside of myself as much as it does inside of myself. It's from our tribal worldviews here in you know, native African tribes, to the extent that if I were to say to you, Alan, how are you doing today? And your mother was sick and your son was in the hospital, you wouldn't be able to say, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Because actually you're not fine. The part of you that lives in the community of your mother and your child or whoever, it is a shared identity, and it comes with, you know, as a essentially a child of colonialists here in South Africa. I'm, you know, fourth generation South African, but still I'm in a very different cultural dynamic as a Caucasian South African than that tribal worldview. The concept of Ubuntu itself has incredible power and also quite a dark side in terms of the us against them kind of dynamic, the tribalism that it can, because I am because of you, my tribe, not necessarily humanity in general. Yeah. So it's also a driver of xenophobia and different dynamics like that. But with that caveat aside, it's an incredibly powerful concept, which is very different to the you know, the Protestant Reformation formed, Enlightenment formed perspective of the individual having autonomy, which is really a new concept in Western culture. It's only 500 years old, you know, and that's why we're so different to African culture and Eastern culture. Anyway, I'm waxing lyrical on.
Thank you, and I was right. You did do it much better than I would have done. I covered on some of the key points there, but I think your lived experience of it is just so much more enhanced. But I come back to the guy, you know, walking the 2 hours to go to work, and yes, I agree with you that in that situation I'd be doing that partly for me, but I don't think I could dismiss the relationship that I had with my employer. So, you know, it's this thing about, well, if they looked after me because my mum wasn't very well last week and they switched some shifts around to accommodate it, then yeah, I'll go. Whereas if they were, well, we don't give a whatever about that, and you need to be there because you're on the roster, then I might be less inclined to go to so much trouble because
If you're not going to see me in my holistic human experience, I'm not going
exactly,
to bring my whole self
yeah.
to this project. Yeah.
And here's a story. So a member of the housekeeping team came to me, and I can't remember why she came to me. Actually, I think she must have been the most senior housekeeper on duty at the time. Anyway, she came in. She said, "We've got a problem making up the rooms for tonight, and I want to know, are we full, and do we need all of the rooms, or can I leave some of them for tomorrow?" So I explained that we were full and we needed to get all of the rooms cleaned, and then asked why, what's the issue? And she said, well, one of my team says that her child's not very well and she wants to go home early. And I don't really know what to do. So I said to her, well, imagine if you were that person and you were now sitting there asking me if you could go home and tend to your sick child. What would you want me to do? She said, Alan, you don't need to say anymore. I'll send her home. But it is this thing around seeing the person as the whole being, right? And the strength of that relationship really fostering a sense of two-way commitment.
Yeah. Yeah. My three children each have a name, different name, that we made up. We made the names up based on the meanings we wanted their names to mean. We didn't look for names we like the sounds of and then go to the name dictionary and see what they meant. Oh, that's a nice meaning. Yes, let's go with that. We, based on what was important to us, my wife and I at the time, we, the concepts, the values we were having in that season. Based on that, we said, okay, we want our child's name to mean this. And then we went and looked through, I don't know how many, every kind of language. Google Translate is a phenomenal tool for this, by the way. We took those meanings, we threw them into Google Translate, and we just tried every single language. And then we took syllables from different words and then retroactively fitted them together. If this word meant this thing, then okay, oh, the first syllable there might be nice. Let's steal that. And then, but the names are always, complex. Anyway, well, that's a long backstory. The point of the story is my middle child, his name is Ryler, Ryler. But his name means, sorry, it's Ryler Kale. Ryler Kale. It's important to get the second name in there too, specifically for the context of his own naming. What his name means is we are, we become in the space between. So Ubuntu thinking and Ubuntu theology, actually, at the time is what I was looking at, was a very important concept for me. We were about to come back to South Africa. I was in Canada and I was homesick for the way we see the world back home. And Ubuntu was one of those important things. But then also from a book I was reading about the left and right hemispheres of the brain, also very by Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary, very influential book.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
I've not read the book, but I've seen the video.
Seen the documentary or just one of his talks?
The documentary.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen all the talks and I've got the documentary.
Look at you.
And I read the book. No, he's been foundational for me. And in that book, he speaks a lot about the space between. He talks about how, perspective in a painting is the relationship of the two different things. Music is not about the notes. It's about, the heart of music is about the gaps between the notes.
Yeah.
You can get a machine to play it perfectly with all the notes in exactly the right time, but the soul is gone. And this is under the purview of the right hemisphere, that it is all about relationship, the relationship between things. So anyway, we're going down a long rabbit hole here, but all that to say, the value of his name was to say, let's find a few different things that speak. So we talked about diastolic pressure, we talked about music, we talked about perspective, we talked about Ubuntu, all sorts of different things, and we drew different syllables and sometimes just one consonant, from different words, creative license to come up with this idea. And it's deliberately a meaning that includes both the first name and the second name, the middle name, Kale, because it is between those two names that it's the combination. Can't remember how we got onto this, but that's a short explanation of the value that we've tried to instill in the naming of our child, that he understands that his identity is shared. It is shared. Yeah. He lives outside of himself, and it's the relationship he has with us, with his siblings and his parents and his friends and his grandparents who live on the property with us. All of those relationships form the person that he is. Anyway, we are well and truly off the theme of commitment here.
Yeah, we might be, but who cares?
That's what happens in a jam.
So I just quickly, what are the other two? The names?
My firstborn is Claydon. His name means of God and earth. So quite literally the clay part at the beginning is earth. Claydon, of God and earth. And then my daughter Bria is our youngest, and her name means gives generously from strength with kindness. So yeah, all three of those names from different seasons in our lives over 6 years, I guess, 6 years in between. No, 4 years in between, 2 years between each, which makes 4 years of gap. Is that right? And yeah, different seasons we went through, a lot of it around my own education, my own MA, my studies in my MA degree, and dealing with a whole lot of these interdisciplinary dynamics that led to power, and thinking about power and thinking about what does it mean to be a human in the context of a creation, and what does it mean to be in relationship.
I think it's one of the most brilliant stories I've heard for a long time, and I feel kind of privileged to know about it. Actually, it just, it's very touching.
Oh, good to hear. Thank you. Yeah, that's encouraging. It got harder and harder as we went. I'm a youngest child. I don't know where you stack up in your own birth order, but I'm a youngest child, so I've always grown up with a gripe against my parents that there's no photographs of me, all the fun stuff was done before I was born, or whatever the whining, self-centered last born things. Anyway, since having children, I have a lot more compassion and sympathy, but at least I have a defense. If my youngest says that to me, I'll say, do you know how long we spent on your name? So much more than your brothers.
I'm also curious to understand how they feel about their names. How old are they?
They are 10, 8, and 6.
Okay, so how do they feel about them? I guess in the context of our conversation, how committed are they to their names?
Yeah, well, one of the things I've tried, so they perhaps might not be quite yet at the age of caring too much, their identity being too consciously attached to their names. But I have two things to say. The one is I have tried to communicate to all three of them that actually all of your names are a manifesto for humanity. So you hold your name in trust for both of your siblings, and their names and their meanings, you need to think about that stuff too. So it's not a case of my name means, like my name, for instance, means, I still can't quite get the story straight. I hear different versions from my mom and my dad, but it means both bold hunter and also bright sunshine. And for me, that's, as I got into my mid to late teens, that became really important to me. Yes, let this be a whatever clarion call for who I'm going to be in the world. I'm going to try and bring light and sunshine to the world, and I'm going to try and be bold and pioneer things. So I always had that just for me. I don't even really know actually what my other three siblings' names mean. I know my one brother's who's named after somebody, and I know why. So there's the meaning there. But yeah, I in my own family of origin, I don't hold them as dearly, my siblings' names as dearly as I'm trying to encourage my children to do. That's the one thing. The other thing is, for each of my three children, I wrote them a song in the wee hours of the morning, cradling them back to sleep for the first 6 months of their life. I would, yeah, basically taking the theme of their name and mapping out line by line, verbally, slowly under my breath, as I was rocking them in the lounge, building one line on to the next. Some nights writing a few lines, other nights going back and tweaking, but all completely organically built.
Yeah.
Organically written, in all of them, in the middle of the night. And so their names have become the memo. Their names have become the creed to give meaning to what, sorry, the songs have become the creed to give meaning and flesh out the meaning of the 3 or 4 words or 6 words or 8 words or whatever it is that make up the meaning of their actual name. Yeah, and that was sparked by, on the day my eldest was born, I had to dash from the hospital to a meeting I couldn't miss. And in the car, I just bought the latest John Mayer album. I don't know which one it was. I think it was Battle Studies or something. And the second song sounded as if it was a song he was writing for his kid. It's one of my favorite songs. I can't even remember what it's called. But driving through to this meeting, I was just in tears in the car at the beauty of this advice that a dad was giving to his kids. So I was like, okay, I'm going to write a song like this for my kid. And then, yeah, it's on my to-do list, is to actually record them and actually have them in proper. I've got them on voice notes, but
It's a great ambition to have. And I don't, this isn't relevant to our conversation, but if you are into music and you like making music, the next year we're going to be inviting submissions for a World Values Day song, and then we're going to choose what will become the official World Values Day song. So last year we did it for the first time. This year, one of the guys is going to kind of do it on his own because we didn't really put enough attention on it. But next year it's going to be part of, I don't know if you're aware, but there's something called the Global Poetry Showcase as part of World Values Day.
I did see something about that, yeah, this year.
Okay. So we're going to have the song as a category within the Global Poetry Showcase and invite submissions and then choose a song. So if you do start to record your stuff and you're tempted to have a go at something like that, yeah. So that before we, this has been a fascinating conversation. Like you've used, I think you said down a drain or a rabbit hole or whatever, but I don't think of it like that. I think of it more like we've gone, feels to me like we've gone up a rabbit hole actually, and we've come out of a rabbit hole, and we're seeing stuff that is much better than where we were before actually.
We still need to get to that final question though. Did we tackle anything in the middle, or did we
just before we do that, I'd like us just to spend a couple of minutes on the metaphor bit. So in terms of commitment, what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Uncomfortable. Does it look? I think it looks like congruence. Who I say I am is who you see I am. I think it can feel very uncomfortable. but perhaps even self-righteous. It can feel self-righteous.
Yeah.
Or arrogant or indignant or on the negative side. And then also, of course, deeply satisfying to know that you have whatever, you've walked the talk, I think. What does it look, feel, and what sound like? What does it look like? I think it sounds in key. It sounds.
I think for me, it feels really solid. A commitment. It sounds like when I thought about it, sounds like it's I will. That's all. That I will. Those words for me summarize commitment. what it looks like is deliver. It's the delivery of what you said you were going to do. So it's a bit like the guy at the front door with the box. That's it. You've got it. But I really like the point that you've raised around the different perspective, because there is this sense, actually, that employee that worked the 2 hours, I'm sure there were other employees who said, what did you do that for?
Yeah, you're not being paid enough to do that.
Yeah, why do you have to do that and have an impact on the rest of us now? Because we're all expected to do that, and I couldn't do that because of my individual circumstances. And what are you doing? All that. So I think there is.
I have to drop the kids at school. I don't have 2 hours to.
Yeah, exactly. And also this thing about the arrogance and the self-righteousness. It's like, well, I did it. Why can't you do it? I did it. I was able to do it.
And judgment and better than you.
Yeah. And it's so complicated, because that might be the perception of somebody else, but actually that might not be your driver at all. It might be just because you said you were going to do it, and so I've moved hell and high water to do it because that's the person I am. And yet in somebody else's eyes, you're an arrogant, self-righteous person. And you may be compromised in other areas that they feel was a mistake in order to be able to deliver on that commitment. So what's coming through for me here is that, and this happens quite a lot as well, is that because we don't talk about these words very often, we tend to hold them at a fairly superficial level. Commitment, oh yeah, it's just doing what you say. Whereas this conversation has shown that there's so many nuances for us to possibly explore. So the final question, actually, that we're going to come to for the last few minutes is this, and it'll be interesting to see whether there's something on the top of your head or whether there's something that you're going to consider. So what are you encouraged to do differently about commitment as a result of our conversation?
Sure. Nothing is coming off the top of my head. Something is slowly brewing. So let me try verbally process it. It goes back to an idea we mentioned early on, that commitment, maybe we didn't say it to this degree, but as I'm thinking it now, I'm realizing commitment is something that is always in service of something else. You're not committed to being committed. You're committed to being a good father, or you are committed to being a boss that sees the whole human being in your employees, or you are committed to waking up and exercising 4 mornings a week, or whatever the scenario is that you're committed to. Commitment is a loyal servant to something else. So perhaps what I am thinking now about doing differently is not about commitment so much as auditing what it is I've said I will be committed to. I think that's maybe the challenge. What is it that I need to maybe say, okay, the season of commitment here needs to end? Or I've said I've committed to this thing, but I'm not actually. I'm disrespecting the value itself that I've said I'm committed to, because I'm not giving it as much as it deserves. Or, for us professionals, of course, the very easy place to go is the relationship we have between our work and our families. It's very easy to talk the talk on certain things, especially things like work-life balance. And I've recently been thinking and publishing a little bit about a different way of thinking about work-life balance, but it's because I'm trying to do justice to what does it mean to be a family man? What does it mean to actually be committed as a father? Yeah, and it plays out in different ways for me, but having a moment of the spotlight being shone on it through the lens of commitment, it's helpful. It's helpful to say, okay, what does it mean to be committed to being a family man when I'm trying to build a business? And that's just one example, but what are the other things we're committed to? Are we committed to excellence? What does that mean? Are we committed to our word? Or, I mean, I don't think any of us would say the time for that is over. But yeah, the fruit of commitment lies outside of the value of itself. It lies in the value of the thing you're committed to.
So I understand where you're going with this. I think what I'm interested to know is what is your first tangible, concrete baby step towards that?
Sure. Counterintuitively, I think the first step is to stop committing to things. You know, cheapening the currency of commitment. I'm like at work, well, even at home, I am guilty of getting very excited in a meeting and saying, yes, let's do that. I'll do it. So I overcommit, which then leads to overpromising and underdelivering, you know, if the truth be told. And maybe that actually then undermines, well, not maybe, it definitely does undermine the value of your commitment.
Yeah.
You know, so I think perhaps the first step is to say, in some ways, commitment is a zero-sum game. There is only so much to go around, and if you commit to too much, you're stealing from other values you've committed to. If I say yes, I'll do that, I'll do this at work, etc., well, then I'm not going to be leaving the office when I want to leave the office, because I'm committed to that, and now I'm stealing the precious hour and a half that I get with my kids in the evening. So my commitment to parenting well, I'm stealing from that. A friend of mine is an entrepreneur, and he in a book he wrote a few years back about building a business, he had a whole section on work-life balance, to go back to what I was saying just now, where he talks about, and this framework I found very helpful at the time was, and it, again, sounds counterintuitive, it sounds like it's negatively framed, but he said he doesn't think about work-life balance, he thinks about what he's willing to steal. So when it comes to work, it's important enough for him to get this proposal out, to land this client, so he's going to steal bedtime stories from his children that evening. But as you know, he hasn't spent time watching his son's rugby match, and actually, no, I'm going to steal the afternoon from work so that I can go and watch the rugby match. And so, as I say, negatively framed, which for some might not be a helpful way of looking at it, but I found it very helpful. This concept of, actually, there's no such thing as balance. I need to be willing to steal things from the values or the areas in my life where I have different values. And you know, to go back to your example earlier of this whatever, the operations or the cleaning staff asking you, how many bedrooms do we need to clean? That's the world, isn't it? That is the world. We have competing ethics. Ethics are never simple. You know, customer centric is one thing, value the employee is another thing, and sometimes you don't know how to square that against itself. You've got time pressure, you've got limited resources. How do you, and in a situation like that, you have to be willing to say, you know what, I'm gonna steal from one. We're gonna have to do a half job on half of these rooms, or we're gonna have to, the rest of the team's gonna have to chip in, and we're gonna have to ask the non-cleaning staff to come and help. Or Alan, you know, get your vacuum cleaner out. You know?
I did that from time to time. I remember those days. So that's thank you very much for the answer. I my my what am I encouraged to do differently? Listening to what you said, I think there's a couple of things actually. One is to really value the value of commitment. So not to kind of take it for granted either when you're receiving it or whether you're giving it actually.
Yeah.
But then the other one, which might be a contradiction to that, is that I feel sometimes I treat commitment in too narrow a way. And I kind of, so I'm at risk of destroying everything around me because I said I would do this thing.
Okay.
And so I think the other side of it is to regard commitment in context, in the context of reality, so that you are not so much at risk of that destruction at the, just to satisfy your ego, actually.
Yes. Yeah, it goes back to that self-righteousness, maybe.
Yeah. And then just a quick aside, which is nothing to do with commitment, but I'm going to look up my name and my kids' names to see what they mean. This is just as a bit of fun. Good. So you are now an experienced, seasoned values jammer. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Yes, it's been fun. Thank you.
Okay, and you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Same to you, Alan.
Yes, Darren.
See you. Bye.